All right, in this chapter we're going to discuss articulation, which I'm going to kind of refer to this chapter as joints. And joints are when any two types of bone come together. And a joint could be a movable joint, like in your elbow or your neck, or it could be a non-movable joint, like in your skull. So anytime two bones come together, we're going to call it a joint, regardless of if they move or don't move. But how we'll classify these different joints is based off of movement. How much movement do they have? We'll be able to classify them that way, and we'll kind of break them down that way. Arthrology is basically the study of how joints move. So arthritis is one of the things that they study. And they study why do these joints become stiffer over time and how can they relieve that process. There's different types of joints that we're going to cover. The fibrous joints, the cartilaginous joints, bony joints which fuse together early on and never really separate. And then the most movable one, which is the synovial joint. And again, we just talked about arthrology is the study of how joints come together and the study of joints. So the one that I think about the most when I think about this one is arthritis. Or there are some where joints continue to grow over time, and that becomes really painful for people because they're getting bigger. Or sometimes those joints will start to deteriorate over time. Articulation is basically where two bones come together, and that's going to be a joint. And joints are classified by the way bones come together. And joints are like the best thing because we've kind of done bones already. And we're going to cover muscles soon. And joints are basically how these bones come together. And eventually we'll talk about ligaments, which is a part of the next unit. And that's how we'll connect bone to muscle. So we're starting to go away from just bone eventually, and then we're going to start to move in the world of ligaments and muscles. So this is a good starting off point of how do we attach bone to bone. The first one, before we even do that, there's different types of ways that we classify these joints, and they're classified on movement. So starting at the bottom, synovial joint is going to be one that moves around a lot, and it's called diarthrosis. Throsis means movement. Bony is going to be synarthrosis, which means that at one time they were separate bones, but they fused together. Cartilaginous is going to be called amphiarthrosis, so they have a little bit of movement, but not a lot. And then fibrous is going to be synarthrosis. This means no to zero movement. The difference between this bony one and the fibrous one, because they kind of both don't move, is that this one is still kind of like a suture or a broken line, where this one has calcified over time, and you can't even articulate where one bone starts and one bone ends. So let's start with the immovable ones, and we'll go to the most difficult ones, which are going to be the synovial diarthrosis joints. So synarthrosis is little or no movement. Bones are bound together with collagen fibers, and there's three different types of these sort of synarthrosis joints that we can talk about. Sutures, which we'll see a couple in a second, they're in our skull. Syndesmoses, which is going to be in between two bones, and then Gomphoses, which is basically a socket, and it allows for very little to no movement, like our teeth. So, excuse me. So let's look at these together. There are three different types of joints, and now you get to at least see a little more picture of them and see what they kind of do. The suture makes sense. They're in our skull, and they sort of join one bone to another. The syndesmosis is basically a ligament that's going to join different types of bones together as a webbing or just hold one bone to another. So here you see the bottom of the tibia and the fibula coming together. And then finally, the Gomphoses. That's just going to be a socket or a peg, and that's going to be able to hold something in, like teeth, and that's going to make it so they can move just a tad, but not enough that they're going to fall out. So let's get into these different types of joints a little more. So again, all of these are no movement, or if there is movement, it's very slight. And let's talk about the first one, sutures. Sutures are definitely immovable when you get older, of course, and they all fuse together. And how these come together are really going to talk about what suture line it is. There's the serrated suture, and serrated means, if you think about a serrated knife, it has sort of these wavy lines at them, and a serrated suture is just the same thing. It's going to be these wiggly lines that sort of come together and sort of interlock the suture together, and it's going to be held together with these fibrous joints to make sure that bone A and bone D don't really move around too much. And these are going to be those bones that you hopefully still remember from lab, the coronal, the sagittal, the lambdoidal structures. These are all going to be held together with this type of suture. Squamous suture is going to be one that overlaps in the edges. So in between different things like the temporal and parietal bones, we're going to see these kind of overlapping edges where one will kind of overgo and the other one will be a little below. So there'll be a little bit of bone overlapping both. And then plain sutures. They're going to be straight, non-overlapping edges, and that's going to be like the maxilla bone, palatine bone, and if you look really closely, you'll see a really straight suture line between them. Gomphoses, it's a socket, and this one makes sense. What you could see here is your tooth. It's in a socket, and it's held together with all these different types of ligament, and it's called the pyridinal ligament, and basically what it's doing is it's attaching one bone to the tooth. And you can see that there's a couple all over the place, and they're holding that tooth in and making sure that it has a little bit of movement, but not a lot to the point that it's going to fall out. And those are just collagen fibers that extend from the bone to the jaw. It allows the tooth to move just a tad in chewing, and that's it. And then finally, the Syndesmoses, which is basically going to be this webbing between one bone and another, and it's bound together with ligaments. So here you could see the radius and the ulna coming together, and they're held together with this meshy sort of ligament. And that's basically going to be a type of ligament that's going to make sure this bone and this bone can articulate over each other, but they won't come apart. They'll hold them together. So this is just a membrane between them. The tibia and the fibula has them as well, and they're going to be the most movable fibrosis joint that we make, but it's just fibers holding one bone to the next.